Hey everyone, I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm Cody Zesiger. I am the agriculture extension agent for Weber, Morgan, and Davis counties. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about weed control and cucurbits. So over the last few years, I've been working on a lot of chemical control options for weed control and cucurbits, but I wanted to tailor this presentation specifically to all of you. So if what you could do for me in this first minute or so of the presentation, if you could pull up your chat and just let me know the size of your melon or cucurbit growing operation, that'll be really helpful for me to tailor this presentation specifically to you. Okay, so it looks like we've got a few that are home garden size, a few that are around an acre, a few around 1/10 to a half an acre. Got a few big players up there that are about up to 5 acres. So we got everybody kind of all over the board. So a little bit about myself real quick. I play in 3 different scenarios in agriculture. I work a little bit on the technology development end with sensors and moisture. Also do a little bit about cover crops and obviously weeds. So that will play into this a little bit. Another thing that I want to quickly share is how you can find other information if you go to the vegetable production guide at our website. And so there's the URL right there, where you can just search in Utah Vegetable Production Guide into Google, and that usually comes up pretty quick. So what's challenging about managing weeds and cucurbits? Well, first of all, they start small. We just saw a presenter showing the plants as they emerge, and we know that they're very small. And so the other thing that plays into that small start being challenging is we generally wait till our soils are pretty warm before we plant our cucurbits. And if we wait till our soils are warm, well, we've given weeds ample opportunity to begin growing. So they've already had a head start ahead of our crop itself. We also have large spacing between plants. It can be 2 to 5 feet in a row and 3 to 10 feet between the 2 sets of rows. And so there's plenty of real estate available there for the weeds. The other few things are that fruits sit on the ground for a long period of time. They've got big vines that crisscross and get in the way of us using equipment to move the weeds out of the way. And we've got a long period where those crops are growing. So there's plenty of time for weeds to germinate, get removed by us, and then germinate again throughout the season. But what are weeds and cucurbits? Mostly they're just plants that are where they don't belong. Over here to the right, I have a picture of what was Causey Reservoir in October. It's the river right there, just because we ended up using a lot of that water, and that plays into a lot of what we've been talking about with drought. But I want you to pay attention to the green that's appearing here. A lot of our weeds, they're just trying to do their natural job to fill in that empty real estate when we don't have anything there. And that's called succession. And so a lot of our summer annuals generally are trying to fill in that real estate, and that's why they grow fast. There are a few ways that we classify weeds, and this is important. I spoke about this last year, but it's important because it will make it to where you have to adjust your weed management based off of how the weeds are classified. So first off, we have broadleaf weeds. Now, if we were to use chemicals, the broadleaf weeds are affected the same way as our broadleaf crop, our cucurbits. So that's something to be aware of. Broadleafs have broad leaves. They have branching leaf veins, just like our cucurbits and taproots. Okay. But then we have grassy weeds. These are a different class. So sometimes we can get away with managing them differently, and it won't actually affect our crop. We also have warm and cool season weeds. any warm season weeds are going to be quite challenging for us in cucurbits because they've ramped up their growth time during the same time that we're trying to grow our crop. A lot of our cool season weeds, they might be a challenge early on if we didn't prep our fields too much, or towards the end around harvest, but they're mostly going to be dormant during our management months. And then we have perennials or annuals or biennials. Our perennials that'll be problematic for us are those that live, perennials live longer than 3 years in general. And those are probably going to be your bindweeds or your Bermuda grasses, just because they're going to be actively growing. I really liked what Josh said about allowing that bindweed to come up, waste a little bit of its energy before we take it out. And that's true. You're going to notice with the bindweed, each time you pull it, it's going to want to grow really fast for a week or two, and then it slows down, and that's when we take it out. Same thing with our Bermuda grass, but these warm season annuals and biennials are what we're going to be mostly worried about. And that would include our purslane, kochia, puncture vine, redroot pigweed. I don't have lamb's quarters pictured here, but that'd be another one, and then possibly thistles. So when it comes to weed management, we have a few options. We always need to look at it from an integrated pest management scheme. That way we're not selecting for those plants to adapt and become more resistant to our management tools. So our tools are prevention, cultural control, mechanical control, chemical control, and biological control. I'm going to go over these quickly before I get into the weeds, so to speak, for our management. Prevention, it's generally our best strategy. It's usually the cheapest. Over here I have on the right-hand side, you can see some pumpkins that are growing a really good crop of redroot pigweed. And I think there's some hairy nightshade in there and a few different grasses. And I would imagine that's barnyard grass that would be coming up through those. So to manage those weeds at this stage would be very difficult. And when we think of prevention, we're usually trying to prevent any infestations from coming onto the farm or our field where we're growing our crop. We can do that by washing our equipment. So if we lend tools to somebody, we make sure it's cleaned off. If we get muddy boots at somebody else's place, we make sure we get that cleaned off. But another one, for those of you that use secondary irrigation, filtration of that irrigation water is going to get rid of so much weed pressure that's going to be coming in on you. And then we also need to be careful when we bring in soil amendments, specifically manures. If we're adding organic matter with straw or hay or something, or we're using it even as a weed barrier, we need to be aware that when those crops are grown, they can sometimes contain weed seeds. So make sure you're inspecting that before you bring it on. I've got another picture here showing how, and I've expanded the idea of prevention a little bit to knocking out infestations as they occur. So if you look on the left-hand side, we've got some, I think they're tansy mustards coming up. They're brand spanking new. I'm filming while one hand hoeing this, and you'll see how easy this is to manage. I hope that appeared on your screen. Sometimes when you play videos, it's a hit and miss. It's a little dangerous. But if you saw, I used almost no effort. I had one hand there and they just came right out. In contrast, on the right-hand side, I'm putting my hand deep into that patch of puncture vine. When we did our puncture vine trials, it took us days to get that out of the field. And so managing early on, like Josh said, is key. And I consider that prevention also. Cultural and mechanical control. With cultural control, I really like to make sure we have good plant competition. We manage those weeds early on so our cucurbits can get really big. They can fill in and they can shade out a lot of the soil. You can also use cover crops and a few other things to do that. And then we can do as much as we can to set up our location so that we're preventing weeds right at the place where our crop is trying to get nutrients and water out of the soil. And we also can physically remove the plants or physically shield them, cook them with solarization. And then if it's the easiest option or the only option we have, we can always mow and just keep it down to try to reduce seed pressure and height of those weeds. So our goals with cultural and mechanical practices for a lot of you are going to either be stop and slow weed growth by shading it out. That can be done with cloth, with the crop, with cover crops, with barriers. We can also have a vigorous crop, so it removes a lot of the nutrients and depletes the water from the soil so that our weeds don't have those resources. One thing that you're going to notice if you're trying to save water is that weeds also have an ET. They evapotranspirate just like your crop does, and so they'll make you use more water if you leave them there. You can also mulch deep enough that those seedlings can't get through. We can also kill all of our existing weeds by pulling, chopping, cultivating, and intermittent mowing. So talking really quickly about cover crops, you know, they can be grown between rows and then terminated early on, so you have a nice little mat between your rows of crop. So we'll go back to that slide here. I think what we actually have in this lower picture is weeds growing between those two rows, but you could imagine that before you came in and planted those rows, that you may have seeded a grain or a clover, something into there, got it growing, and then terminated it somehow to create a nice little bedding to keep your crop directly off the ground, but maybe also shade out some of those weeds. So cool season cover crops could be really useful for this. If you plant them in the fall, I caution against rye actually, because it's becoming feral and it's causing a lot of fires on our benches. So I would pick a different grain, maybe a winter wheat or a winter three-way, or just in the spring early on, get some oats or something like that in that you can kill. You're going to have a hard time doing a warm season cover crop during this, but you really just want to consider, what's your water budget? Do we want to be watering cover crops during the season, or do we want them just to use the winter moisture that we got in the scenario of using like a grain? When will we terminate those cover crops? What's our plan for the residue? Right here, I've got a sorghum Sudan grass hybrid. That's about 40 to 60 days of growth right there that I'm walking through. Some of it's 5 feet tall. Do you have tools to manage those cover crops? Okay. Here are oats that I planted in April, and this picture with the steer was taken at the beginning of June. You can see we have 1.5 feet of growth. That's about the same time we'd be wanting to get our cucurbits in, and so we could easily get that killed, maybe till in a strip, and then put our crop in there. Weed barriers. Do we want to use natural or synthetic materials? Examples of these are mulches, bark, soil pep, straw, clippings, compost, cardboard, tarps, plastic mulch, fabric weed barrier, and woven polyethylene or another plastic that's woven. Do we want it to be semi-permanent? Do we want it to be replaced annually? If it's replaced annually, do we want it biodegradable? Does it want to go to the landfill? Sun damage, does UV degrade it? So there's a lot to think about as we choose our weed barriers. I remember one year, my wife and I, we chose to get that fabric weed barrier that people use in their flower beds. And that works great as long as you have something on top of it like rock or bark or like a soil pet. But we didn't realize that it was damaged by UV, and within weeks it was being completely degraded by it. So we had to switch to something else. So make sure you know if you're going to pick something that's going to be semi-permanent, that it's going to last in the presence of the sun. So I want to talk a little bit about some pros and cons of natural materials. So the pros are that they're often biodegradable or green waste. They can add nutrients to the crop. They can look nice when applied properly. Removal may not be needed post-harvest. It could just be tilled in, or it will continue to just break down. They can build that humus, that organic layer of the soil. They increase water holding capacity. They can reduce evaporation from the surface. And they can also be used with synthetic materials, and I'll talk about that in a second. Cons is they might be a weed vector. If you're bringing in straw, you might be bringing in weeds. They may not stop weed emergence either if it's not thick enough, or if you just have the wrong type of weeds for that barrier. They can also add excess salts and nutrients that will cause chlorosis and damage the crop and reduce your yield. If you're on a hillside or near a roadway or something, and you've got a lot of water going on that, you can actually leach those nutrients either into the gutters or into the stormwater system, and then you're causing a water quality problem. So be aware of that. They're also often not permanent, so it's going to continue to be an investment over time. And at a large scale, let's say you're one of those 2 to 5 acre people, soil pep doesn't come cheap. It's $66 a yard. And so that can quickly add up. And then with natural materials, especially if we're using cover crops that we terminate and use as a mulch on top, there can be some toxicity to plants that we want to grow, because they naturally create these natural allelopathic compounds that damage other plants. Synthetic materials, pros and cons. They may be used with natural materials. They can look nice. Removal may not be needed if they're permanent, although it can be a beast if they do need to be removed every year. They can stop, if they're a hard barrier, they can stop nearly all weeds. They increase soil temperature and warm our plants to get those watermelons or whatever we're growing a little boost early on in the season. They can be permanent or semi-permanent, and they can prevent the fruit quality or improve the fruit quality by preventing soil contact, to where we're not exposing them to pathogens or puncture vine burrs or something that are putting holes in and rotting those plants. Some of the cons are, if they're not a permanent solution, they usually end up in a landfill, though they can be biodegradable. If we choose the wrong stuff, they can be damaged by UV. The thinner synthetic weed fabrics are easily punctured when you walk through them, or if you bring equipment through. They can blow away if we don't get them installed correctly, and they can sometimes require equipment. I'm thinking plastic mulch like we see in these rows here. It's much easier to get that in with a bedding machine and a tractor. So just some examples over here on the left top, we have compost. In the middle, we've got the soil pet, and I'm a big fan of soil pet over regular barks, just because it tends to be a lot softer, both on you when you're trying to do work in there, but it also just holds a little bit tighter, doesn't blow around as much because it packs down a little bit better. We've got straw here, and I want you to notice that there are some seed heads in that straw, but it can still be a great option. And then we've got a few different types of fabric. This is an example of that fabric that wasn't UV resistant. However, you can buy UV resistant varieties. This is more of a semi-permanent woven fabric. And then here we've got our plastic mulch that we generally use annually. And this can be great at large scale and cost effective. And then chemical control. We got to decide if we're going to do chemical control. We've got to decide which weeds we have, because that's going to affect our choice of herbicide. And so if we're just going and spot spraying, sometimes we can get away with non-selective herbicides. But I do want to mention that any herbicide that you choose, you need to make sure that it's labeled for your site and your crop, and that you're just following the label in general. Otherwise, you can get yourself into big trouble real fast with just having a crop failure or regulatory. And then there are selective options. So if we just want to kill a certain type of plant, but we don't want to kill another, a great example of this is carfentrazone. It will only kill broadleaf weeds, but it doesn't affect grasses. And then we've got pre-emergence and post-emergence herbicides. Our pre-emergence herbicides are lay it down, set it, and forget it. It's going to kill the weeds as they try to emerge from the soil. They last a little bit longer, and our post-emergence, often, though they can last a long time, that's what we apply directly to the plant to kill it immediately. And a good example of that is carfentrazone. If you use that, you get pretty much a real-time feedback on that, whether it's working or not. Here's an example of how thick weeds can get into cucurbits, and how chemical options based off of what we chose work better. If you look at the bottom part of the screen and the top part of the screen, none of that was treated. That's just the natural weed pressure. We've got a few spots here, 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 and there where nothing was treated. And then you can see different levels of efficacy with chemicals. So takeaways. And I'm moving through this quickly to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions. Takeaways are: good weed management can increase yields and improve opportunities for other activities. If we wait to the end of the year, like we see either there or here, our weed management is going to take us so much more time, and it's an opportunity cost for us to be spending out marketing our product and getting it sold or taken out of the field. Manage the weeds present. You're not managing for weeds that aren't there. So identify the weeds that you have and make sure you choose the best option for what you have. Choose management that meets operational goals and prevent future infestations, and investing early saves in the long run. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will take any questions.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Cody. I got a question here from Bruce. He asks about biodegradable materials. Does that mean the plastic actually breaks down to finally end up being carbon dioxide, or does that mean that there might be issues with microplastics that we've been hearing about?
So I could see both of those being true. I know a lot of them break down from the sun, but there's probably some others that break down a little bit differently. Dan, I know that you have a little bit of background information on these biodegradable plastic mulches, but it's my understanding that a lot of them are broken down by solar radiation, right?
Yeah, there's some work coming out of Washington State where they're doing it, and a lot of the newer biodegradable materials are made out of plant-based, what they call plant-based plastics. And so in effect, they are going to probably break back down all the way to CO2, and they're not putting in any petroleum products into those. That is what the microplastic problem is going to be. So you get pretty careful with what you select and that kind of stuff if you're looking at the biodegradables, and kind of research what the materials are that go into it, and then you can start to integrate those into your farm. And one last question here is, any suggestions to fight the recent explosion of cut leaf viper grass?
So cut leaf viper grass is going to be very, very difficult to manage in any situation where you're growing a broadleaf plant. We can easily kill cut leaf viper grass with chemicals if we're in a grass setting. But a lot of the research with cut leaf viper grass has been focused on cut leaf viper grass that's growing in alfalfa. And so a lot of the alfalfa labeled chemicals that manage cut leaf viper grass well will actually kill the alfalfa. So if we're in a range or a grass setting, we can kill it with chemicals. Otherwise, I would suggest mechanical removal before flowering or barriers to try to keep it down.